My name is Jessica Carter. I'm 39 years old, and the last time most of my family saw me, they thought I was living out of a beat-up sedan, drifting from one couch to another, barely getting by. The truth? I hadn't been a getting by, I'd been undercover. But that's not the sort of thing you can explain over Thanksgiving turkey. The last family gathering I attended was 3 years ago, my father's funeral in Boston. I drove 12 hours for my assignment in Chicago, arriving in faded jeans, an oversized hoodie, and scuffed sneakers. My hair was pulled into a messy bun, and I carried a worn duffel bag. I blended perfectly into the picture they painted of me, the one who never lived up to her potential. What they didn't know was that my clothes weren't from a thrift store. They were tactical gear disguised as streetwear, lined with concealed compartments for surveillance equipment. The hoodie alone cost more than my mother's monthly mortgage. I could have walked in wearing my police dress blues, polished to perfection, but walking into a room full of people who think you're a failure has its advantages. My younger sister, Rachel, a rising star corporate attorney in New York, wasted no time spreading her version of my situation. Jess has been struggling, as she told my uncles in a voice that was just loud enough to carry across the room. Lost her job at the precinct. Been couch surfing since. We've tried to help, but you know how stubborn she is. I didn't bother correcting her. Let them think what they wanted. In my line of work, deep cover narcotics for the Chicago Police Department, the fewer people who knew the truth, the better. For the past 15 years, I'd been infiltrating gangs, dismantling trafficking operations, and pulling guns off the streets. I'd earned commendations most officers never dreamed of, but the files were classified. Outside the department, I was just the one who couldn't keep a steady job. Rachel had the kind of life that looked perfect on a holiday card: a Manhattan condo, a surgeon husband, 2 photogenic kids who played violin. She never missed an opportunity to contrast her achievements with my supposed failures. Jessica was supposed to be the smart one. I overheard her telling one of Dad's old friends. Full scholarship to the academy. We all thought she'd be chief of police by now. Goes to show, you never really know people. The irony was sharp enough to cut. While she was busy winning property cases and networking over cocktails, I was spending nights in unmarked cars, listening through hidden mics, and working cases that made headlines only when they were closed. It all would have stayed that way, me letting my family think I was barely scraping by, if it hadn't been for Rachel's second engagement party. Her first marriage ended when she had an affair with a client, but the family politely spun it as a finding her true self. Now she was engaged to Dr. Daniel Wright, a celebrated cardiothoracic surgeon with a sprawling estate in the Hamptons. The invitation arrived by mail, forwarded through 3 security drop addresses before it reached me. A black tie event at the Ritz-Carlton in Manhattan. The kind of party designed for Rachel to parade her success like a trophy. I nearly tossed the invite in the trash. But at bottom, in her looping script, she'd added, "Jess, I know things have been rough for you, but family is family. Please try to clean up and come. Daniel's family will be there, and I'd like them to think we're normal." Clean up. As if I were something dirty to be scrubbed away before presentation. I had just wrapped a grueling 7-month undercover in Detroit, infiltrating a gun-running crew tied to a cartel. My CO had suggested I take a break, reconnect with normal life. Maybe, I thought, this was my chance to see if I remembered what normal felt like. So I RSVP'd yes, but didn't tell Rachel I was coming. When the night arrived, I walked into the Ritz ballroom 40 minutes late, wearing the same battered hoodie and jeans from my father's funeral. I'd even rubbed a little dirt into the cuffs for effect. The hostess at the door looked me over twice before checking the guest list. "I'm Rachel's sister," I said. "Jessica Carter." Inside, crystal chandeliers threw warm light over tables covered in white linen and glassware that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Rachel stood near the bar in a dress that could have been lifted straight from a fashion magazine. When she spotted me, her smile froze for half a second before she regained her polished composure. "Jess," as she called out, voice dripping with performative cheer. "Everyone, this is my sister. We're going through a tough time, but she made it tonight." The smiles I got in return were polite, pitying, and a little uncomfortable, the same looks I'd given suspects before slipping the cuffs on. If only they knew. It took less than 10 minutes for the room to decide what box to put me in. I could feel it in the way people's eyes slid past mine, in the two bright smiles that said, "Don't make this awkward." Daniel stood with his parents near the windows that overlooked Central Park, telling a story about a charity mission in Guatemala. He looked like a magazine ad for success, tailored tux, easy grin, hand at the small of Rachel's back like he owned the air around her. I kept to the edges, collecting details the way I always do on a scene: exits, security, the waiter who kept favoring his right leg, the florist's truck idling out front. Old habits don't ask for permission. They live under your skin. I was returning from the bar with a club soda when I heard my name in a honeyed whisper. "Jessica, yes," said a crisp voice. "Rachel, dear, I'm only asking because optics matter. Your sister seems troubled." I slowed behind a column of white orchids. Daniel's mother, Evelyn Wright, had the kind of posture that made pearls look like armor. Rachel's reply was soft, but practiced. "She won't talk about work," Rachel said. "We think she left the department. She's been living out of her car, sometimes. It's complicated." "Is it substance-related?" Evelyn asked, the words tiptoeing but landing hard. "I don't know," Rachel murmured. "She's always been intense. Brilliant, but no common sense. She peaked early. Now she just, a delicate sigh. She drifts." I stared at my reflection in the window. Hoodie, flyaway hair, the woman they decided was the family cautionary tale. Something cool settled behind my ribs. Not heartbreak, colder. A familiar steadiness that comes right before a breach. Evelyn continued, "A Daniel's board work depends on a certain image. It would be best if your sister kept a low profile at the wedding." "I'll handle it," Rachel said quickly. "I always do." I set my glass down and walked away before I remembered how to breathe. The rest of the night blurred. I smiled when spoken to, contributed to conversations at the precise temperature of harmless. When someone asked what I did, I said, security consulting, which was both true and useless. I hugged my mother, who told me in a small voice that she was glad I came, even like this. I let Rachel air-kiss my cheek, and I left before dessert. 2 weeks later, she called. "Jess," as she began, "too bright, just a heads up. The wedding's in Montauk. Very intimate. Daniel's parents are worried about distractions. If travel is hard right now." "I'll be there," I said. A beat. "Okay. Just dress appropriately. And maybe shower." She laughed like it was a joke. It wasn't. I ended the call and stared at my kitchen wall until the clock forgot how to tick. Then I opened the drawer where I keep the things I don't show anyone. Citations folded into thirds, a photo of my class at the academy, and a plain business card with a number that doesn't exist in any phone book. I dialed. Carter, I said when the secure line clicked. Captain Alvarez, came the reply. Gravel, coffee, and midnight briefings. You're on leave, detective. I need a favor, I said. It's personal. But it isn't petty. A long exhale. You asking me as my detective or as a person I trust not to waste my time? Both. Try me. I laid it out quickly. The engagement party, the assumptions, the wedding where I would be treated like a stain to be hidden. I don't want a parade, I finished. I want the truth in the room. One time. Then I'll put the lid back on. Another beat. I could hear paper sliding, a chair creaking. You're still cross-designated with the ATF task force, Alvarez said. Your last caller put a half-dozen guns off the street. If you're going to rip off the mask, you do it clean. No half measures. I know. You'll have a loaner class A and a temporary detail for optics only, he said at last. Marked federal plates. You don't flash anything unless you're challenged. You don't discuss cases. You will not embarrass this department. Clue. Crystal. Text me the address and time. And Carter. Yes, sir. Don't do this to hurt them. Do it so you can stop carrying their story about you. The line clicked dead. I stood there with the phone to my ear and realized my hands were shaking. Not from fear. From relief. The right estate in Montauk looked like money had a blueprint. Crushed shell drive, shingle perfection, hydrangeas so manicured they might file taxes. I arrived late on purpose, the sky turning that dusky watercolor that makes everything in the Hamptons look like a catalogue. Same hoodie. Same jeans. I walked past the valet, gave Rachel's name at the gate, and watched a ripple move through the seated rows like wind through tall grass as I took a chair in the back. A string quartet stitched expensive music over the surf. Rachel was luminous. Daniel looked like a commercial for Legacy. During the soup course under the reception tent, Judge Wallace, Daniel's father, leaned toward my mother, his voice pitched for an audience. Your daughter seems improved, he said. And what is it she does now? My mother faltered. She's very good with computers, as she offered, bless her heart, reaching for anything that might sound respectable. I consult, I said softly, saving her. Security issues. Interagency stuff. How stimulating, Evelyn said, and I could hear the glass chime of condescension in the word. Have you considered other opportunities? Something more stable? Sometimes stability is just a pretty word for stuck, I replied, then smiled so she'd think I meant nothing by it. Dancing started. Lights came up like stars trapped in the tent ceiling. Rachel glided over, brittle smile, voice pitched for sisterhood. Jess, we need to talk. Daniel's parents are worried. Your or outfit? You told them I was living in my car, I said. Not a question. Color climbed her neck. I was trying to help. They need to understand the context. The context, I repeated. I looked at the ocean, dark and endless. I'll be right back. Inside the house, I found a quiet study lined with maritime prints and books no one reads. I texted Alvarez the go code. He replied with a single thumb up and a pin drop, 20 minutes out. Back in the tent, I ate exactly 3 bites of overthought quinoa and let the clock count down. When the distant hum of AV8 rolled up the drive, something in me loosened. Not vengeance. Closure. I excused myself and stepped onto the front lawn as the black SUV turned into the circle, government plates catching the light. 2 agents I knew from joint ops, Morrison and Nguyen, got out like a scene they'd practiced 100 times. Morrison handed over a sleek garment bag and a hard case. Compliments of the captain, he said. Said if Carter's going to set the record straight, she should do it looking like herself. In the powder room off the foyer, I shed the hoodie that had become a myth and slid into Class A blues that fit like a second spine. Silver bars. Citation rack that didn't need to speak loudly to be heard. Task force shield clipped where belonged. I pinned my hair, checked my cuffs, and when I looked up, the mirror returned someone my family had never met but the city knew well enough. Detective Jessica Carter, Chicago PD, Cross-Designated Federal Task Force. I opened the hard case. Inside, a slim folio, official letters authorizing interagency liaison status, nothing sensitive, everything tidy. Enough to say she is who she says she is without saying anything I couldn't. I took one breath, rolled my shoulders, and walked back toward the tent, where laughter swelled and the ocean kept time. Conversation snapped, then softened, as I stepped beneath the lights. Rachel saw me first. The glass slipped in her hand, not shattering, just ringing once like a bell. Work called, I said to the table, setting the folio down where the pearls could see it. I had to change. The week leading up to my sister's engagement party in Chicago felt strangely calm. For the first time in months, I wasn't running surveillance shifts or chasing down leads on a trafficking ring. My captain insisted I take a real time off, though any cop knows there's no such thing. Even on leave, your instincts never shut off. The invitation from my sister, Emily Carter, had been sitting on my kitchen counter for over a month, its elegant gold script practically daring me to show up. The venue? The Palmer House Hilton. Black tie optional, but the Carters never did optional. If the dress code said black tie, they meant it. I'd considered tossing it, like I'd done with most family event invites in the past decade. But then I saw her handwritten note at the bottom. Laura, I know things have been rough for you lately. Please try to look presentable. I'd like David's family to think we're normal. Look presentable. The words rolled around in my head for days. In her mind, I was still the sister who never quite measured up, the one with the unpredictable work schedule, the bruises I never explained, the car that always looked one oil change away from the junkyard. She had no idea that my scuffed boots and worn jeans had more miles on them than most people's luxury sedans, or that every tear and stain came with a story, a late-night stakeout, a suspect chase, a rescue gone right or wrong. My wardrobe wasn't a fashion choice. It was my armor. Still, I decided to go. Not because I owed her anything, but because part of me wanted to see the look on her face. I'd spent my career in plainclothes units where invisibility was a skill. Tonight, I'd use that skill one last time. I arrived late enough to make an entrance, wearing my most in-character-y outfit, faded jeans, an oversized hoodie, and hair pulled back into a low, messy ponytail. I even dabbed a bit of dirt on the knees for effect. The hotel lobby glittered with crystal chandeliers and polished marble. The doorman glanced at me, his professional smile twitching. The hostess at the ballroom door checked her list twice before handing me a name tag with obvious reluctance. Inside, the ballroom was everything Emily loved: towering white floral arrangements, live jazz, champagne flowing like water. She stood at the center of it all, laughing with her fiancé's family. David was a corporate lawyer from an old-money Boston family, and you could tell, posture like a senator, smile like a campaign ad. When Emily spotted me, her expression shifted in rapid succession: surprise, irritation, and then the forced brightness she used when pretending nothing was wrong. "Laura, you made it," as she announced, loud enough for the nearest half-dozen people to hear. "Everyone, this is my sister. She's between things right now." Between things. That was her way of saying unemployed and probably a mess. I smiled faintly, shook hands with a few of David's relatives, and let them size me up. I could practically hear their inner monologues. How unfortunate. What happened to her? Maybe she's here for a handout. David's mother, a perfectly coiffed woman in pearls, leaned in with a smile so tight it could cut glass. "Emily tells us you work in law enforcement? But not currently?" "Something like that," I said, sipping my champagne. His father, a retired judge, added, "And you're figuring things out?" "That's one way to put it." Emily jumped in, as she's had a tough few years. "We've all tried to help, but she's very independent." Translation: stubborn and ungrateful. I let the conversation drift, keeping my expression neutral while my eyes tracked exits, security, and the man in a navy suit who had been hovering too close to the catering staff. Years of police work made it impossible to stop scanning for threats. Then I heard it, Emily's voice, low but not low enough. She was talking to David's mother near the window. "Never really settled down. She's been living out of her car sometimes. Won't take help. I think she's embarrassed. David's worried she might be, well, using something." Something cold settled in my chest. Drugs. My own sister thought I was a junkie. I turned away before they could see my reaction, but my decision was made. Tonight, I'd let them keep believing their version of me. But one day soon, they'd learn exactly who I was, and it wouldn't be on their terms. 2 weeks after the engagement party, Emily called. Her tone was sugar-sweet but threaded with control. "Hey, Laura, I just wanted to give you a heads up about the wedding. It's going to be a small ceremony at David's family estate in Cape Cod. Mostly immediate family and a few close friends. I know travel might be difficult for you right now, so if you can't make it." "I'll be there," I said before she could finish. She hesitated. "Right. Okay. This is an important day. First impressions matter. So maybe this time you could dress appropriately. And, make sure you shower," I said flatly. Her laugh was high and nervous. "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." I hung up before she could backpedal. My hands were steady, but my mind was already running a playbook. I'd spent my career building cover stories and dismantling criminal fronts. This time, the up was personal. The morning of the wedding, I called Captain Alvarez. "You still owe me that favor," I said. There was a pause. "What kind of favor?" official transport, full Class A blues, and a presence that says federal businesses without saying why. Family? Yar. He exhaled through his nose. You planning on blowing your cover? Not my work cover. Just the one they built for me. Another pause. Send me the address. The right estate looked like it had been carved out of a lifestyle magazine. White clapboard walls, manicured lawns sloping toward the Atlantic, a tented reception area that gleamed under the late afternoon sun. Guests in tailored suits and pastel dresses milled about, their laughter blending with the sound of waves. I arrived in my familiar jeans and hoodie, driving my dented sedan past a valet who looked like he was calculating whether to stop me. At the gate, the security guard scanned his clipboard, frowned, and found my name on what I guessed was a supplemental list. I parked near the far end of the gravel drive. The ceremony was picture perfect. Emily was stunning in lace, David handsome in his custom tux. I sat in the last row, invisible except for the occasional sideways glance from one of David's aunts. The vows were rehearsed, the kiss camera ready. It wasn't until the reception that the murmurs started again. At the family table, David's father leaned toward my mother. Your daughter, he said, his voice pitched just loud enough for others to hear. She seems better than at the engagement party. My mother smiled, relieved. Yes, Laura's been doing her best. And she's working now? She's between assignments, my mother said carefully. She's very talented with investigations. I see, he said, with a tone that implied he didn't. From across the table, Emily was watching like a hawk. When the dancing started, she approached me, her smile tight. Laura, can I talk to you? Alone? We stepped just outside the tent. The air smelled of salt and money. Look, as she said, I don't want to fight. But David's parents, they're concerned. They think you might be struggling with something. You've been secretive for years. You don't talk about your job. You show up looking like someone who doesn't belong in your perfect world. I finished. She flinched. That's not fair. Neither is letting people think I'm living in my car. Her lips parted, but no words came. I left her standing there and walked into the house. The study was quiet, lined with nautical prints and shelves of lore books. I took out my phone and texted a single word to Alvarez, now. 15 minutes later, I heard the low growl of an engine outside. I stepped onto the front porch just as a black SUV with government plates rolled into the circular drive. Two plainclothes agents I recognized from Joint Ops, Morrison and Nguyen, stepped out. Morrison carried a garment bag and a hard case. From the captain, Morrison said if Carter's going to tell the truth, she might as well look the part. Inside the powder room, I stripped off the hoodie and jeans, replacing them with my formal Class A police blues. The fabric settled on my shoulders like armor. Silver bars on my collar, service ribbons above the pocket, my detective shield polished to a shine. My hair went into a tight bun. I looked in the mirror and saw the real me, the one they'd never bothered to imagine. In the case were official liaison credentials for my federal task force work. Nothing sensitive, just enough to make it clear I wasn't a between things. I stepped back into the reception tent. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. Emily's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. Work called, I said, placing my credentials on the white tablecloth. Had to change. David's father reached for the folio. His eyes scanned the letterhead, then widened. Detective Laura Carter, Chicago Police Department, assigned to a federal joint task force? That's right, EI said. 15 years in service. Undercover work, major case squads. The kind of things we don't put on Christmas cards. Emily's face drained of color. The silence that followed could have swallowed the entire tent. Even the string quartet hesitated mid-note. I could feel the weight of every pair of eyes. The pity had shifted into something sharper, a mix of confusion, curiosity, and embarrassment. David's father cleared his throat, his voice tighter now. Your security clearance here, it's higher than mine ever was on the bench. That's correct, EI said. Part of my job involves coordinating with federal agencies on organized crime and trafficking cases. I'm not always at liberty to discuss details, which is why I don't. Emily pushed back from her chair so abruptly it toppled behind her. I need to speak to you. Now. We stepped out into the fading light on the lawn, the sound of the ocean rising and falling in the background. Her hands were trembling, whether from anger or shock, I couldn't tell. How could you do this to me? She demanded. To you? I repeated, keeping my voice calm. Yes. You let me tell people you were struggling. That you were unemployed, maybe using drugs. You told them that, I said evenly. I never did. You didn't correct me. Because operational security isn't optional, I replied. And because it didn't occur to me that my own family would rather believe I was a wreck than consider there might be more to the story. Her jaw worked like she was chewing over a dozen things she couldn't say all at once. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is for me? For David? His parents are judgmental. I cut in. I noticed. Her eyes flashed. They're important people. They have reputations to maintain. And I've been maintaining mine in a very different arena, I said. One where the stakes are life and death, not whether your hydrangeas match the drapes. You could have told me. I couldn't. And you never asked. That stopped her. For a moment, all I could hear was the surf pounding against the rocks. Asked what? She said finally. If I was okay. If there was more to the story. You never asked, Emily. You just assumed. And you built an entire narrative about me that suited you. Her shoulders sagged, the sharpness in her expression giving way to something raw. I thought you were wasting your life. And you felt better about your own by believing that, I said quietly. She opened her mouth, but I didn't let her speak. You need to get back to your wedding, I told her. Cut the cake, take the pictures, dance with your husband. Then tomorrow you can figure out how to live with the fact that you treated your sister like a cautionary tale for years, and you were wrong. Tears welled in her eyes. I'm sorry. I believe you, I said. But sorry doesn't erase the things you said. It doesn't change the way you looked at me. It doesn't change the fact that you didn't trust me enough to think there might be a reason for my choices. She reached for my arm. Please don't leave like this. It's my wedding day. I met her gaze. And I've already done more to protect you than you'll ever know. Enjoy the rest of your evening. As I walked back toward the tent, Judge Wallace intercepted me. His expression was more sober than when I'd first arrived. "Detective Carter," he said formally, "I owe you an apology." "You don't owe me anything," I replied. "I do," he insisted. "I made assumptions based on incomplete information. In my profession, that's inexcusable." I studied him for a moment. "If I'd shown up tonight in this uniform from the start, how would you have treated me?" He hesitated, then said, with respect. "As a professional. As someone serving their country." "And because I showed up in jeans and a hoodie?" His gaze fell. "I assumed you needed help." "So my worth as a person was determined entirely by appearance," I said. "That's a dangerous way to measure anyone." He didn't argue. "Instead," he said quietly, "you've given me something to think about." "I hope so," I told him. "Because you have a daughter. And one day she might show up looking like she's struggling. I hope the people around her see more than the surface." He nodded slowly. "You're right. I'll remember that." I left the tent without saying goodbye to Emily. Morrison was waiting by the SUV, engine idling. "How'd it go?" he asked as I climbed in. I thought of Emily's tear-streaked face, my mother's stunned silence, Judge Wallace's discomfort. Let's just say, mission accomplished. The SUV pulled away from the estate, the ocean disappearing in the rearview mirror. For the first time in years, I felt the story they'd written for me starting to crumble, and I wasn't going to pick up the pieces for them. 3 weeks after the wedding, I was back in my squad car on a freezing Tuesday morning, parked outside a warehouse on the south side. My partner, Detective Perez, was sipping burnt coffee and watching the front entrance through binoculars. "You okay?" he asked, not taking his eyes off the target. "Yeah," I said. "Why?" "You've been quieter than usual. Even for you." I smirked. "Family drama. You don't want the details." "You're right," he said. "I don't." We went back to watching the door, waiting for our CI's signal. The case was the kind that never made the evening news but saved lives all the same. A gun pipeline feeding crews in 3 different states. 2 months of wiretaps, surveillance, and sleepless nights were about to come to a head. As we waited, my phone buzzed. A voicemail from my mother. I didn't need to listen to know it was about Emily. She'd been trying to reach me through every channel that didn't involve showing up at my precinct. That night, when I finally got home, I called her back. "Laura," she said, relief obvious. "Emily would like to have lunch with you. She's been seeing a therapist. She wants to talk about the wedding. About everything." I leaned against the counter, staring at the corkboard covered in case notes and mugshots. "Why now?" "She said she owes you an apology." "She already gave me one," I said. "On the lawn, in her wedding dress." "This would be different. She's been thinking about what you said." I was silent for a moment. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "All those years you thought I was living out of my car, maybe using drugs. Did you ever once think that didn't sound like me?" There was a pause. "I wanted to believe it wasn't true," she said slowly. "But the evidence seemed so clear. You were secretive, you missed family events, you wouldn't take help." "The evidence," EI repeated. You mean the story Emily told you? It wasn't just Emily, as she said gently. We all, or filled in the blanks. I closed my eyes. And none of you asked why. I'm sorry, honey, Ishi said, her voice breaking. We failed you. Yeah, EI said quietly. You did. The next morning, Perez and I moved in on the warehouse. Our team breached fast and clean. By noon, we had 8 suspects in custody, 15 illegal firearms off the street, and a ledger that would keep the DA's office busy for weeks. As I drove back to the precinct, adrenaline fading, I thought about the contrast. How in my world? Trust was built on actions and reliability, not appearances or gossip. My team didn't care if I showed up in boots caked with mud or dress uniform. They cared that I had their backs. At home that night, another letter from Emily was waiting in my mailbox. Her handwriting was neater than usual, deliberate. Laura. I've been replaying that day over and over. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I know I have no right. But I want to understand you, the real you. If you're willing, maybe we could start over. Emily. I read it twice, then slid it into a drawer with the others. She had written 3 letters since the wedding, each more apologetic than the last. I hadn't answered any of them. Not because I wanted her to suffer, but because I didn't know if she wanted to know me or just wanted to fix her own guilt. A week later, I heard through a mutual cousin that Emily had filed for divorce. Something about irreconcilable differences. I didn't ask for details, but I had a guess. I'd seen the way David's family operated, all surface Polish, all judgment. My sister's perfect facade had cracked, and they'd seen what was underneath. I hoped she was finding her footing, but I also knew that wasn't my job anymore. One evening in March, I was working late when my captain passed by my desk. You're still here? He asked. Just finishing reports. He hesitated. I heard about the wedding. Morrison told me you handled it with restraint. I gave a dry smile. I wasn't there to win. He studied me for a moment. Sometimes winning isn't about beating the other side. It's about making sure the truth is in the room. I thought about that long after he left. By late April, the weather in Chicago had decided to pretend spring was real. The streets were wet with melted snow, the air smelling faintly of rain and exhaust. My days were swallowed by case files, joint briefings with ATF, and follow-ups from the warehouse bust. Nights were quieter, just me, a stack of cold cases, and the low hum of the refrigerator in my 1-bedroom apartment. That's when the call came. It was my mother again, voice careful. Honey, Emily is going to be in Chicago next week. She asked if you'd meet her for lunch. Neutral place. Just to talk. I didn't answer right away. I stared at the whiteboard in my living room, half covered in notes from a stolen vehicles case, like the details might rearrange themselves into a reason to say yes. She said she wants to hear about your work, and my mother added. The real story. You're changing. Changing, I repeated. Or trying to erase the version of me she told everyone about? She told me she's been rethinking a lot of things since the wedding. I believe her. I let out a slow breath. I don't know, Mom. I'm not telling you to forgive her, as she said softly. I'm asking you to give her a chance to listen. The following week, I sat in my car outside a little diner on the north side. From the window, I could see Emily already inside at a corner booth, nursing a coffee, her phone face down on the table. She looked different. No high-gloss hair, no designer jacket. Just a plain sweater, jeans, and the kind of nervous energy I'd seen in witnesses about to testify. I didn't get out. My hands rested on the steering wheel, the engine still running. It wasn't fear holding me there, it was the memory of all the times she'd looked at me with pity thinly disguised as concern, all the years she'd chosen the easiest story over the harder truth. I thought about my captain's words, sometimes winning isn't about beating the other side. It's about making sure the truth is in the room. The thing was, the truth was already in the room. I'd put it there at her wedding. Instead of walking in, I drove away. Not out of spite, but because I realized I didn't need her validation anymore. I'd been measuring myself against her expectations for so long that I'd forgotten they were never mine to meet. That night, I came home to another letter in my mailbox. I didn't open it. I slid it into the same drawer with the others, a stack of paper apologies I wasn't ready to cash in. Work didn't stop. The next morning, Perez and I were at a crime scene before sunrise, a suspected drop house in Little Village. We cleared the place in under 10 minutes. 2 suspects in custody, stash of unregistered handguns, a duffel full of cash. As we loaded the evidence into the van, Perez glanced at me. "You seem lighter." "Maybe I finally stopped carrying someone else's baggage," I said. 2 weeks later, word got around that Emily had moved to Seattle. Environmental law, of all things. I pictured her in rain boots, standing in a courtroom full of zoning maps, and hoped she was finding something real to hold on to. I didn't call her. She didn't call me. But I knew, in the way you know a storm's passed because the air feels different, that some of the weight between us had shifted. One Friday night in June, after a week of back-to-back warrants, I was leaving the precinct when Alvarez stopped me at the door. "Carter," he said. "Got a minute?" I nodded. "You ever think about taking the promotion? Lieutenant slots opening up." I shook my head. "I'm where I'm needed." He studied me for a moment. "You're good at keeping things under wraps. But sometimes you've got to let people see what you've done." I smiled faintly. People who matter already know. That night, I sat on my balcony with a beer, the city lights stretching out like a map of every call, every case, every choice that had brought me here. Somewhere out there, Emily was rewriting her own story. Mine didn't need edits. For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, not in someone else's shadow, not under someone else's microscope, but standing squarely in my own life. By August, the summer heat in Chicago had turned the air heavy, the kind that made you feel like you were wearing an extra layer even in a t-shirt. I'd been running point on a joint operation with ATF and the US Marshals, a multi-state sting targeting a network of illegal firearms moving through the Midwest. The briefing room smelled like stale coffee and printer toner. Maps, photos, and timelines covered the walls. I stood at the head of the table, outlining the plan for the final takedown. "We've got 2 targets confirmed on site," I said, tapping the satellite image with a pen. "Security cameras cover the front and west side, but the alley here," I pointed to a narrow gap between 2 warehouses, "is a blind spot. That's our entry point. We go in quiet, we go in fast. No cowbeer moves." Perez grinned. "You mean like last time?" I gave him a look. Last time worked, didn't it? Alvarez, leaning against the doorway, cut in. Focus. Carter, your lead. Bring them in clean. Yes, sir. 3 hours later, I was crouched behind a dumpster in that very alley, sweat dripping down the back of my neck under the tack vest. My radio crackled softly with updates from the perimeter units. Front door, clear, a one voice reported. West side, clear, another said. I signaled to my team. On me. The breach was textbook. Door open, room swept, suspects down. One man bolted for the back exit, but Perez intercepted him before he hit the street. The entire operation was over in 6 minutes. As we processed the scene, one of the marshals, a younger guy named Jackson, walked over, shaking his head. Never seen anyone coordinate a sweep that smooth, he said. Guess the stories about you are true. What stories? I asked. That you don't miss, he said simply. Not on the street, not in the planning room. It caught me off guard for a moment, not the compliment itself, but the fact that it was built on what I'd actually done, not on how I looked walking into a room. We were loading evidence when Perez nudged me. You're smiling. Am I? Yeah. It's weird. I shook my head, chuckling. Just thinking. About the wedding. About the way Judge Wallace's face had changed when he realized who I was. About Emily's stunned silence. And about the fact that, for years, I'd let them all carry a version of me that was nothing but assumption and surface. Out here, on the job, there was no room for that. No one cared if my hair was perfect or my boots were polished. They cared if I had their backs when it counted. Respect wasn't a costume you put on. It was the sum of what you'd shown you could do. That night, back at my apartment, I pulled open the drawer where I kept Emily's letters. I didn't read them. I wasn't ready for that. But I didn't push them to the back anymore. They sat near the front, within reach. Maybe one day, I'd open them. Not because I needed her apology, but because I might be ready to see if she'd learned the same lesson I had, that appearances are the weakest measure of worth. 2 weeks later, Alvarez called me into his office. He was standing by the window, hands in his pockets. You ever wonder why I gave you that SUV and the blues for your sister's wedding? He asked. I shrugged. Because you knew I'd make a point. He shook his head. No. Because I wanted you to see it too, how quickly the room changes when people see what you've actually earned instead of what they think you are. Sometimes you've got to let them see it, Carter. Not for them, but for you. I didn't answer right away. Then I said, and maybe I get it now. He smiled faintly. Good. Because something tells me you're not done proving it. It happened on a grey October afternoon, the kind that smelled like rain before it even started. I was off duty for once, wandering through a bookstore downtown. My idea of a day off was a black coffee and a stack of true crime paperbacks no one in my unit wanted to touch on their own time. I was flipping through a book on federal case history when I heard my name. Laura Carter? I turned, and there she was, not Emily, but someone who had been in that wedding tent, Claire Wallace, David's younger sister. Last time I saw her, she'd been wearing pearls and an expression like she was worried I might spill red wine on her shoes. She looked different now. Jeans, sweatshirt, hair pulled into a messy bun. Her surprise was genuine. I didn't think you lived in Chicago. I do, I said cautiously. Still with the PD? She nodded, shifting the paper shopping bag in her arms. Listen, I've been meaning to tell you. I didn't get it that day. At the wedding. But I do now. I raised an eyebrow. What changed? Her mouth twisted into something halfway between a smile and a grimace. Let's just say, my job isn't going the way I planned. I got laid off. I've been interviewing, and the way people treat you when they think you're not successful, it's like flipping a switch. Makes you realize how fast respect disappears when people think you've lost your footing. I leaned against the shelf. And now you see why showing up in jeans and a hoodie was educational. She laughed softly. Yeah. My brother's family didn't exactly cover themselves in grace that day. I didn't let her off the hook. You didn't either. She nodded without defensiveness. True. And I'm sorry for that. There was a time I would have brushed her off, walked away without giving her the satisfaction. But instead, I said, apology accepted. Just make sure you don't forget what it felt like on the other side. Her eyes softened. I won't. After she left, I sat in the cafe corner with my coffee, letting the conversation settle in my mind. It struck me that the lesson from that wedding wasn't just for my family, it was for anyone who thought they could size up a person in one glance. And maybe, just maybe, some of them were starting to learn. 2 nights later, I was called in on an emergency detail, a multi-agency pursuit of a suspect tied to a triple homicide. The chase ended in an abandoned building on the west side. My team moved in, sweeping the crumbling hallways. When we cornered the suspect, hands up, adrenaline buzzing in my ears, I realized something. The way my fellow officers looked at me in moments like this was the exact opposite of the way my family had looked at me that day. Here, I wasn't the messy sister. I was the one leading the stack, clearing the rooms, making the calls. Respect built on skill, not surface. Back at the precinct, Perez tossed me a bottle of water. You're quiet again. Just thinking, I said. About what? That maybe you can't change how everyone sees you, but you can decide whose opinion matters. He smirked. Deep thoughts for midnight. Yeah, I said, half smiling. Guess I'm getting soft. When I got home, there was another letter from Emily in my mailbox. This one was different, shorter, more direct. Laura, I understand if you never respond. But I want you to know I've stopped telling the old story. About you, about me. I'm working on a new one, and I'm trying to make it true this time. I held the letter for a long time before putting it in the drawer. The difference was subtle but important. She wasn't asking for forgiveness anymore. She was taking responsibility. The first snow of November came early, featherlight and indecisive, melting the moment it touched the street. I was finishing paperwork at my desk when the radio cracked with an amber alert, 6-year-old taken from a grocery store parking lot, last seen in a grey minivan headed west. Every cop in the city felt the same lurch at those words. I was already moving before Alvarez finished assigning units. Perez slid into the passenger seat as he fired up the engine. You thinking what I'm thinking? Stolen vehicle crew we've been tracking, I said. They swapped plates 2 blocks after the grab. Check traffic cams for the alley behind Holstead and 19th. Dispatch patched us into the city's camera grid. 30 seconds later, We watched grainy footage of a grey van nosing into the alley. It slid out wearing different plates. Got you, Perez breathed. I radioed the new plate, called the route, and hit the lights. What I didn't say out loud, if we were right, we had minutes, not hours. We found the van abandoned under the Roosevelt Road overpass, still warm. I scanned the interior, candy wrapper, kid-size glove, handprints in the dust on the back window. The prints were low, small. My throat tightened. A witness pointed us toward a storage yard 2 blocks away. The gate was chained, but fresh tire tracks cut through a patch of slush. I vaulted the fence, landing in a grit of salt and ice, and signaled Perez to loop around. The yard smelled like cold metal and old oil. Inside the third unit, I heard it, a choked hiccup that wasn't quite a sob. I eased the door up. A girl in a pink coat sat on a milk crate, cheeks blotched, eyes too wide. Beside her, a man started to rise, hand going for his waistband. I didn't shout. I closed distance. Police, I said, calm and level. Hands where I can see them. He made a choice I wish he hadn't. The move was sloppy, mine wasn't. 10 seconds later, he was cuffed and face down, and the little girl's fingers were tangled in the sleeve of my coat like she'd been waiting for it. You're safe, I told her. I've got you. By the time patrol arrived to take the suspect and EMS cleared the kid, the snow had stopped. Perez and I stood by the open unit, steam ghosting from our breath. You didn't even blink, he said. I blinked, I said. Just not when it counted. He tipped his head toward the ambulance as it pulled away, lights gentle instead of screaming. This is the part no one sees on the holiday cards. Good, I said. They don't need to. We finished statements at the precinct. Alvarez walked over, reading the early report, then looked up at me. Nice work, he said simply. I shrugged, suddenly tired in the way that lives in your bones. Team effort. Sure, he said, but his eyes were warm. Go home, Carter. Outside, the air had the brittle clean smell that follows snow. My phone buzzed as I reached my car. A text from an unknown Seattle number. It's Emily. I heard about the Amber Alert. Mom sent the link. I don't know how you do what you do, but I'm grateful you're out there doing it. I'm in Chicago next week. If you're willing, coffee. If not, I'll understand. Either way, I'm proud of you. E. I read it twice, feeling the strange quiet that comes when a long loud noise finally fades. I didn't answer. Not yet. I slid the phone into my pocket and drove home through streets dusted in sugar. In my apartment, the radiator ticked like an old wristwatch. I stood a moment, letting the stillness catch up to me, then pulled open the drawer where I'd filed Emily's letters. I laid them out in a neat stack, newest on top. A strange thing happened. For the first time, they didn't look like a ledger of owed apologies. They looked like a map, messy, incomplete, but pointing in the direction of something that might someday be called repair. I brewed tea and sat on the floor with a pen. On a fresh card, I wrote slowly, careful not to dress the truth in more words than it needed. Emily, I don't need you to be proud of me. But I'm glad you want to know me. Coffee sounds fine. Neutral place. No performances. Tuesday, 11 a.m., Sable and Maine. If you're late, I'll give your table away to a rookie. Laura. I stared at my name at the bottom, then added a line. P.S. I'm not great at small talk. Bring questions. I'll bring honesty. I sealed the card before I could edit the softness out of it, snapped a photo for the unlikely event I'd lose my nerve, and propped it by the door to mail on my way to roll call. Sleep was a rumour that night, but it was the good kind, mind busy with things that might get better instead of things that could go wrong. Around midnight, I stepped onto the balcony. The city hummed low, steady. Somewhere a plough scraped, somewhere a siren rose and fell, and somewhere a family was holding their kid a little too tightly because tonight went the way it was supposed to. I thought of the wedding tent, of pearls and pity, of the moment when the room changed because a uniform told a story they believed. I thought of the warehouse and the storage unit and the kid in the pink coat whose world had just been stitched back together by people who didn't care what anyone looked like, only what they did. Appearances are snapshots. They catch a fraction of a second and pretend they know the whole film. I spent years letting other people's snapshots define me because it was easier than arguing with them. The truth didn't need their permission to exist. It just needed a place to stand. The next morning, I mailed the card and reported in. Perez tossed me a donut like a peace offering. Big day? He asked. Maybe, I said. At least wear your good hoodie. I laughed, surprising us both. I'll think about it. By 10:58 on Tuesday, I was inside Sable and Main, a small cafe with mismatched mugs and a barista who played jazz at a volume that let you hear yourself choose your words. I ordered 2 coffees and took the corner table facing the door. My hands weren't shaking. At 11:03, Emily walked in. No pearls, no armor. Just a woman who'd misread a story and was brave enough to try again. She searched the room, found me, and stopped like she had reached the last page of a book and realized there were more chapters after the acknowledgements. I stood. She didn't rush me with a hug or a speech. She just said, hi, like a door opening. Hey, I said, and gestured to the chair. Let's not waste it. Saturday. She took out a small notebook. I smiled despite myself. Questions? I asked. Only if you're ready, she said. Try me. Outside, the day was bright and ordinary. Buses groaning, someone walking a dog in a sweater, a kid in a stroller pointing at a pigeon like it was treasure. Inside, we began, slowly, imperfectly, in the language of grown people learning to tell the truth. I didn't offer her a uniformed version of myself. I offered her the one who shows up, who does the work, who leaves the door unlocked for what might be possible. Later, back on shift, Perez asked how it went. Like a good interview, I said. More listening than talking. He nodded. Think there'll be a second round? Maybe, I said, and the word didn't feel like a risk. It felt like a plan. That night, as the city settled under a sky clear enough to see a few stubborn stars, I climbed into the squad car and checked my radio. A dozen voices braided into one purpose. Streetlights blinked, windows glowed, and somewhere, assumptions were being made and unmade. Ready? Perez asked. Always, I said, and pulled us into the river of headlights, the badge on my chest catching just enough light to remind me what it was for. The truth doesn't wear evening wear, and it doesn't need permission. It rides quiet in the passenger seat, shows up at warehouses and weddings and coffee shops, and does its job. Sometimes that's enough. And sometimes, it's everything.